speaking to a more recent trend, what are your thoughts on commercial drone funds and more specifically the commercial drone ETF?
Yeah, so drones are an interesting technology because they hit all the marks I look for in what we would call a disruptive technology, right? They change the economics of it. They take, when it comes to military, for example, they take people out of the cockpit, which reduces, cost of labor, it reduces human fatigue and mistakes, it reduces the liability that comes along with accidentally getting somebody killed, making a bad mistake, but it also means that drones can fly 24/7, which people can't do. I mean, they don't get tired, they don't hurt their back, they don't make mistakes, they don't get injured, they don't go off the job. So drones are running 24/7. So they give new capabilities, yet at the same time they reduce costs. And that is the definition of a disruptive technology. It's an entirely new kind of economic model, if you will. The thing about drones in the commercial sector is the FAA hasn't ruled yet on whether or not drones are going to be allowed to fly over the United States. Similar countries all around the world have got problems with, where will drones be able to be deployed, at what altitudes, in what numbers, how will air traffic control happen. Bureaucracies don't move quickly. Right, just like driverless cars, it's going to be decades before we see drones flying over cities in number, if we ever see it at all. It could be a thing where the government decides, hey, this is just not a vision of what we want for our society, and that's a huge risk. I mean, a risk that's really hard to put a multiple clamping thing on. It's not like, say, the risk that this drug or that drug is going to be evaluated positively by the FDA. You can kind of handicap those odds, right? It's pretty hard to handicap the odds of presidential elections and the FAA policy and Congress and what they're going to do. So investing in commercial drones is really honestly best done by staying in the Defense Department right now. Any pure play technology has got a huge risk in it. It may have high potential upside, but drones are really easy to copy. All the patents on that technology are gone, right? The patents have been expired. They were sucked up by the defense industry. And so now you've got all these open source drones, 3D robotics, these kind of companies that are out there just saying, hey, build your own drone at home. It'll only cost you 99 cents or whatever. And so, you have a bad mix. It's good economics for the buyer of the drone, but not necessarily the seller, who can have no competitive moat, like we talked about earlier. There's really no way for somebody making a drone other than the relationship, say, with the Defense Department or Fortune 500 companies, being that kind of big supplier. Other than that, what other competitive advantages can you have when you don't really have any patents, when the software systems are predominantly open source today? So I haven't seen any player really emerge onto the field that I think can win in the commercial space, hang long enough for the regulators to get around. And so I think commercial drones, buy Lockheed Martin. That's really your best play on drones. At the end of the day, it'll improve companies like that's margins. They make a great deal of margins on servicing and maintaining those kind of things. But, is Amazon going to be delivering packages via drones? That was a popular news story. Not in the next decade, that's for sure.
Okay, and what are some of the most important trends for technology investors to stay abreast of?
Technology investors have to learn to separate the difference between science and technology. Those are two very, very different things. So you can go out and you can read, the Ray Kurzweils of the world and have an absolutely fantastic time learning about this and that, genetic discovery, how they created mice who don't age, or you feed them red wine and coffee and they'll live forever, and all these kind of little scientific discoveries. Turning that into a practical technology that's cost effective, that can go to market competitively, that people will adopt at scale, that's what takes time. What you really want to look for is, what are people buying? What are people using? You want to find out what the next hot technology company is going to be? Open up the App Store on your iPad and just look at the top paid applications or the top free applications, the trending graphs. Again, buy growth, right? As an investor, the science is interesting, but it's the growth that you want to buy. So you want to find those companies who are posting real growth in the number of users. It doesn't necessarily have to be revenues today, but who can show they can build a community, they can sustain that community of users, and then eventually they'll be able to monetize them. Drones, for example, have built a community of users. Certainly we're seeing hundreds, thousands of people now building and buying drones who never would have before. Whether or not they can sustain and monetize that community, that's a question. If this thing is a novelty and wears off. But you look at things like WhatsApp. Facebook spent billions of dollars buying a messaging company, and the reason that they spent those billions of dollars is because that was time that users weren't spending inside of the Facebook application, and that's a big risk to Facebook's revenue. So you kick these kind of like Snapchat, etc. Well, they may seem like ephemeral products. As they last, as they stick around, as they prove a couple of years worth of consistent usage by their users and growing, they're going to become a threat to somebody's advertising revenue or somebody's monetization model, and they're going to get snapped up. So again, you buy growth. You buy growth in users, you buy growth in revenue, but at the end of the day, buy something that's sustainable, continuous, compounding growth, and that's your best bet as a technologist.
Okay, and finally, what area of the technology sector gets you most excited?
People go back and forth on technology with their hot and cold. They loved 3D printing a couple years ago. Now you barely hear anything about it because most of the 3D printing companies were just raising capital when they could. Gartner has a great explanation of this. They call it the hype cycle, and it's this graph that kind of has a big bump at the front where everybody gets really, really, really excited about technology, and then it comes down like a roller coaster on the other side where everybody's like, oh, it just didn't work. It didn't work. And then a couple of years later, all of a sudden the technology people were excited about is in market and working and making money. And I like being on the far side of that hype cycle. So I tend to not get excited about the things that people are excited about. When I see everybody talking about drones, then I'm going back and looking and say, hey, 3D printing is probably a good place to start looking right now. And in fact, 3D printing valuations have come down dramatically. I don't think it's a good investment yet, but you give that another 6 months, another year, and those companies are going to start to look really, really interesting from a valuation perspective. So I think the most exciting area of technology to be is wherever other people aren't excited. And wherever they were excited 2 or 3 years ago, even 4 years ago, you're going to be on the other side of that hype cycle, and you can start to sort of shake out reality from the hype and invest in something that's actually going to grow. And that's really the interesting part to me, So while I do follow everything, I follow it so I can find out when people stop listening to it, right? Things like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to become an interesting technology now because people have stopped talking about it, stopped caring about it. The value of Bitcoin with a capital B has sort of disappeared. And Bitcoin with a capital B is not going to be here in 5 years. It's just, useless technology as an implementation, but the concept behind it, if improved, could be absolutely huge for payment processing networks, for private market transactions, dark pools of capital. It could be a big, big, big financial innovation. But it's the underlying technology when it gets a little more investment, a little more maturity. But certainly the companies that exist today, few, if any, of the ones we know of are going to be the ones to emerge to really dominate that field. So that's where I like to look. I like to watch the other side of the hype curve.
Great. Thank you for joining me, Alex.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm Teresa Matich with the Investing News Network.